Words of enlightenment, as usual, guys. I'd like to take the time and welcome our guests. Um, this is our second time trying it. The first time I had some issues on my side, and we couldn't make it. But I'm so excited that we're able to have it again. So I want to thank you because I always tell my people I want to honor you for coming because I know you're coming with some precious stuff, your time, very precious. And the other is your journey. It created you. It gave you. I tell people it gave birth to the individual in front of us, and so we want to honor our individual. I want him to come introduce himself to you guys, and I always ask this question, Carl: how do you serve mankind? Welcome to Threads of Enlightenment.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This is a wonderful opportunity to finally join you. And the last time we tried to do this, there were some technical
Yeah.
things that interrupted the session. So it's a great thing that we have better luck today. So yeah, so my name is Carl Unegbu. So I live here in New York City. I'm a lawyer and a journalist. And so yeah, so I it's interesting. You should ask me what I do to like, in other words, how I help the communities, sort of. Um, yeah, so I sort of try to, so I cover like comedy, right?
Mhm.
I was an editor of a comedy website uh, for a long time. Then then I wrote a book, and the whole time, I was always like a lawyer too. So, but when I do what I do, I try to like explain the world to people. In other words, things that they might not otherwise be able to access, information and other uh, endeavors, aspects of life. Uh, Specifically, with respect, first of all, that's why I work as a journalist. Journalists
Yeah.
are storytellers. They explain the world to everyday people, people on Main Street. They break down things that are sort of like esoteric. They break them down into very simple, accessible language. So that's what journalists do by training and by orientation. So that's where I come at this. When I talk about comedy, where I was an editor of a comedy news site, uh, the idea was to like explain something like the law that would otherwise seem arcane, to the community of comedians and other people out there, comedy lovers. Comedy is
Yeah.
such a popular art form these days that a lot of people embrace the art form. They want to be out there for a laugh, to be entertained. So yeah, so comedy is sort of a way to reach the greater, the broader society. And so when I cover comedy, the idea was to, when I covered it, the idea was to like, just tell people what was going on in the comedy space, tell them about shows, about issues that comedians were tackling, and then that's from the editorial and reporter side of my work. Then when I decided to write a book, the idea was to explain to comedians the law because many of them were beginning to ask questions about, you know,
Yeah.
what the law does in terms of like how it relates to their life, what they do for a living. Because, they noticed that many of them were beginning to get sued a lot, especially since
Mhm.
2000 up until the present time. In other words, lawsuits sort of became a cost of doing business in comedy, which was surprising because, one would think that comedy is just all fun and games. Well, it should be, and in a lot of ways it is, but it has also become this new thing that has become like a magnet for lawsuits in a place like America, which by
Yeah.
reputation is the most litigious society in the world. So it became a real issue in the comedy space. Comedians and their followers, it sort of became like even a menace to the art form. So comedians wanted to like have a way to understand this new phenomenon of too many lawsuits and how they can navigate, you know, the space going forward. So that was where I came in. explaining to them, as a service, really, um, what the law says about, especially something like free speech. I mean, comedians, they
Yeah.
talk for a living. That's just their whole game. They talk for a living. And they talk in a way that, well, they are edgy. They are
Mhm.
edgy. They like to break rules. And, when you do that in a society that is so litigious, where people sue literally anything that moves, then that's a recipe for getting yourself get sued. So so those things they were becoming a real thing, a phenomenon that anybody would notice easily. That there were all
Yeah.
these lawsuits. It was supposed to be people who were entertaining others, but they were now like getting dragged into court. And so that's sort of where the title of the book came from. Like comedy goes to court. The book I have written that I am talking about in a lot of
Yeah.
places. Comedy goes to court. That's what it looks like when
Yeah.
people stop laughing and start fighting. So yes, so that's where that came from. And this was the chapter that I wrote about free speech. The book has like 7 chapters. Again, the whole thing was about me trying to explain that world, a world like law. First of all, law and comedy are so different from each other. Comedy is happy-go-lucky, very free-wheeling. People are laughing and having fun. It's all fun and games for the most part. And then law is like this thing that regulates behavior in society, telling
Yeah.
you what to do, what not to do. You break those rules, you get punished. So these two things naturally come into conflict. One is too free-wheeling, happy-go-lucky, and then one is all about restrictions, telling people what to do, what not to do. So those two worlds sort of collide. Even though they
Mhm.
collide, they still have to live together because, everybody lives within the law and under the law. So that's where I came in. Comedians had these issues with this thing increasingly, more so than ever before. So I began to like really explain to them what this thing is about,
Yeah.
how not to get in trouble, how to stay safe, and to reassure them that despite this new thing people are worried about, that the kids will be all right, as they say, quote and unquote. So, but anyway, so I covered in this book like 7 chapters, starting from how you write the deal, how you make the deal, write the agreement, so you can get paid for your work. Because
Yeah.
there is no shortage of people who are willing to not pay you if you are not careful. So I had to like get them to know how to write this deal, structure the
Yeah.
thing so you get paid. And then I moved to the next chapter about free speech, the ability to speak freely and not get in trouble, for instance. Because, again, comedians, they always talk. And that's how people get in trouble, especially in a litigious society. They talk about things that people are uncomfortable about, maybe rape jokes or talking about the Holocaust or, you know, transgender issues, things that really get people's hackles up, especially in this kind of hypersensitive society that we now live in.
Yeah.
Yes, I go from there to, other things about their joke, their material and things. And then, even the chapter I have about their relationship with people who are not comedians, which means the rest of us. Because, marrying a comedian or having a comedian as a member of your family, or, dating a comedian, it's not like dating a doctor or a lawyer. Comedians are a different, thing altogether. And
Yeah.
a lot of the things they say come from their experiences. So if you're their date, you can expect them to talk about you on stage, about what you do with them. So, sometimes people get
Mhm.
embarrassed. Comedians don't have shame about things like that. They are extroverts. But then the people involved with them, sometimes they are squeamish about those things being said. They feel, you're dragging their private lives out into the open. You're washing dirty linen in public. So, yes, and, there are lawsuits that have arisen from these things.
Yeah.
There are significant others, people in relationships with them or family members who have sued to try to get them to stop talking about private things in public.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we've had those things. So I mean, it's part of the kind of stuff I cover in the book. But ultimately, um, this book is not just a book for comedians. It's a book for the society more broadly, especially
Mhm.
those who live in a free society. Who appreciate the First Amendment, say in America, where you're free to speak your mind and do those kinds of things. So comedians, uh, they now have arrived at the front lines. I mean, you may have heard, you and your audience may have heard about cancel culture and woke ideology, the woke mob,
Yeah.
who cancel people, prevent them from talking. Yeah, so they are out there. They are out there attacking the rest of us, but they are attacking comedians more specifically. Now, why? Well, comedians become the first line of defense because, they are the ones who talk for a living. And they talk in a way that offends people because, they tend to be edgy and rule breaking. And when you're like that, and you don't care about politeness, you go wherever the joke is. So when you're like that, you're bound to offend people and you're bound to get sued. So when they get sued, it gives us a chance to know what the First Amendment and free speech still mean today in society, as opposed to a generation ago. Because today, we live in what people consider a very hypersensitive society, what they call the offense society, the grievance society. So, yeah. So free speech today is no longer what it was like a generation ago. I mean, it used to be that, well, yeah, people have, they tell people, oh, get a sense of humor. There were things you could have said before that nobody would really, take you up on or string you around for, or like pillory you over. Now, if you say those things, you could actually get in trouble. So yeah, the society has become this kind of very hyper-partisan society characterized by the woke ideology, where the standards are constantly shifting. I mean, sometimes you don't know what would cause offense until you've actually said it. Then suddenly everybody's calling for your head, and you're like, well, I didn't know that there was a line drawn here. I mean, we used to be able to, walk past these lines in the past. Well, people they are going to tell you, well, not anymore, not anymore. Well, if they say not anymore, did they let you know ahead of time? Or did they just pounce on you because they think you have crossed the line that you didn't even know was there?
Wow.
So these are the problems that people face today in this society we live in. It's I mean, America was always, for instance, a very litigious society. And then you overlay this thing with cancel culture and woke ideology. And it's like all hell breaks loose. It is not very hypersensitive. You could get in trouble for saying even some of the most unexpected and harmless things. It's just people are that sensitive. Now, comedians now, they come in here now. They are people who talk for a living. They talk, they make jokes. They are edgy. So they come into a collision with this society out there. Now, so they have arrived at the front lines of this battle over free speech because now they are the first people who get in the crosshairs of this cancel culture people. So if they survive, we survive. If they don't, then we don't. And the reason is simple. Comedians don't have any more rights than the rest of us when it comes to free speech. Our rights to free speech is the same, it's identical to theirs. So if they get in trouble over what they are saying, free speech and things, then it gives us a chance to know what the contours are, the limits of free speech today. So they sort of become our canary in the mine, as they say, our dog in the fight. If they lose, we lose. And, so the metaphor I like to use is to say that they fly closest to the sun. If you can protect those who fly closest to the sun, then you can protect all the rest of us who don't venture anywhere near the sun when it comes to free speech. So this is a very big thing. It's a huge consequential situation and deal here. This thing with free speech, because it's not just comedians; it's the rest of us that are concerned. So they are the test case situations that give us a sense of, how far are we still a free society in terms of like what we can say, how we can say our minds. Because, if you look at the First Amendment, that's the First Amendment in the US Constitution, for instance, the freedom of speech. So for a very long time, it was always taken for granted that in this society, you can speak freely. It's no longer so. So, well, it's no longer apparently so. So we have that kind of situation, and it's part of the things I cover in this book. And frankly, that's sort of where the title comes from, the chapter on free speech. And it's the biggest chapter in this book, which is, when people stop laughing and start
Yeah.
fighting. So
Yeah, that's really interesting, Carl. I didn't even know that. I could see it after you talked about it, that family members would be suing other family members, suing and stuff like that, and where in order to prevent that joke or whatever it is. Um, I don't know what it is because I could see why, but I never thought that it was something that people did.
it is. It is. Like I have in this book some cases here. Like there's this case where I have this British woman, a couple. They were going through a divorce, and then they were trying to, you know, put together a separation arrangement agreement. And then
Mm-hmm.
the soon-to-be ex-wife was saying, okay, that she wants to put in the agreement that this soon-to-be ex-husband never talk about their marriage on stage, the marriage that was failing, that was now going to like lead to a divorce. Now, uh, the guy said, no, you can't make me stop talking about that. I've been dying for 2 years to talk about this failed marriage. So you can't
Yeah.
make me stop. And, she wasn't able to get him to agree not to talk about the failed marriage because, you don't have that kind of right. So
Yeah.
that the free speech is still okay in that sense. And then I have the other case where uh, the woman was not the comedian, not the ex. It was not the woman who was the comedian. And then she was talking about how, during the marriage, the ex-husband abused her, that she suffered lots of mental and physical abuse and all that stuff. And then the ex-husband, he got so offended and embarrassed, and then he sues her. Well, I wouldn't say how it ended, but, you might have to read the book to find out. But yeah, and the next one I have is about a Jewish family where the daughter-in-law was a comedian. And then she would go
Mhm.
on stage and she would be talking about like how what it's like to be married into a Jewish family, how the in-laws treat you, the kind of food and Jewish culture and things of that nature that are there. So the in-laws got embarrassed, so well, you can't be talking about our life on stage, sharing this information with people we don't even know, the world out there. So they sue her to get her to stop. They sue her for, embarrassing them and everything. Funny thing is, her husband, the Jewish guy, he's a lawyer, so he defended his wife against his family, and they won. They won the law. It's funny. And then, the other one I get into here, the other case I get into here, with that chapter on, comedians and the rest of us, is a situation. I actually know the guy involved. A situation where a guy who was a comedian was also a judge in a
Oh wow.
courtroom, a judge, yeah, who presides over cases in a courtroom. But then he would moonlight as a comedian, and nobody knew that he was moonlighting as a comedian. Um, and then when he goes talking about comedy, he will be talking about, his views on various kinds of things. Comedians being comedians, talking about how he hates children, he doesn't want any children. Then he talks about people from different ethnic groups, religion, and all sorts of stuff. And then people began to like feel concerned that, well, look, if this guy is behaving this way as a comedian, maybe if I show up in his courtroom as a party to a case, he might not be fair to me. He might not be
Yeah.
unbiased, given all these things he says as a comedian. So there was controversy about that. People tried to kick him off the bench, to remove him from being a judge, remove him as a judge, and then the case went all the way to the Supreme Court. Well, I won't say how it ended, but you might have to read the book. But I didn't think myself that I didn't think myself that he couldn't continue to be a comedian as long as he like made it clear. Uh, like because there was a way he was doing his comedy. He has a different name as a comedian from his name
Mhm.
as a judge. And then when he goes talking about comedy, he never ever mentions that he's a judge. And then when he sits as a judge the next day in the courtroom, you would never know that he's a comedian because
Yeah.
he wears his judge's robe and he does his cases normally. But after a while, people kind of noticed that yeah, there was this there were these two aspects of this gentleman. He's a comedian here and he's a judge here, and people didn't think that those two things were compatible, at least in a way that made them feel comfortable. So, they filed complaints, took him up before the highest authorities in the state to try to get him off the bench. Well, it was funny the way it ended, which, I mean, I didn't support the way it ended, but it is what it is.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah,
Bef-
so these are the things that happen. So comedy is not just, it's not this. It's not just a book for comedians alone. No, it's a book for all the rest of us who care about not only free speech, but who have relationships with comedians. Sometimes even relationships that we did not ask for. Like
yeah,
somebody who is a judge, you walk into a courtroom to defend a case or whatever, and then somebody is a judge and he's a comedian. So, these are things that concern. It's not a book just
yeah,
for comedians. It's a book for all the rest of us who live in society. And sometimes we get into relationships with comedians that we did not ask for. You know, I mean, if your husband is a comedian, then you ask for that kind of relationship. You went
yeah,
into the thing with your eyes open. Or a member of your family is a comedian. Yeah, you can expect all of that. But if a judge is a comedian and you walk into his courtroom, you know, so I mean,
yeah, yeah.
it's not,
That's
you didn't exactly ask for that kind of a relationship with a comedian, but there
yeah.
you are. He was a
That's an
comedian.
interesting um, uh, story, Carl. The fact, again, and I'm glad that you're sharing with us all these things because it's a world that a lot of people don't know anything about. We pay the ticket, we get up there, we laugh for a little while, we come out, we go home. We don't know some of the nuances that you're talking about. I've never even thought of a judge being a comedian and someone looking at that judge because he's a comedian and saying that it's going to affect his day job, if you will,
Yeah,
as a judge being a comedian. Um, that's yeah, it's a tough one, man.
it does. It ended in a way that, it was funny the way it ended, but it was very interesting the way it ended. I mean, I was in the minority in terms of like, how it should end. Because the idea was whether he should be allowed to continue
Yeah,
acting in both capacities or if he should be forced to choose.
yeah.
Well,
Wow,
long story
that is
short, he was forced to choose, and you know,
yeah.
um, your readers, your audience would have to read the book to find out what he chose to do.
Yeah,
Whether
we,
he chose to
we
be a comedian or he chose to be a judge, but
yeah, all you guys that are listening to us have this conversation. I mean, get the book because I've some of the stories he's talking about and the situations I've never really imagined. Again, most of us are not dating a comedian. We most of us are not. I've gone to many comedy shows, and again, we just show up, we buy the ticket, we laugh, we come out, whatever. Um, but Carl has given us some behind the scenes information, a little more as to what that world is like within a society that has changed and forever changing, um, being, I guess, further away from its core in the sense that the First Amendment is there as one of the tenets within the hallmark of America. Yet within that framework of that, because of the changes in society, we are drifting from that benchmark. And then the comedians, as Carlos stated, these guys are the ones that will take a hard subject and probe it and bring it in front of our faces. Many of us are um, get a little edgy or a little uncomfortable, if you will, about it. And as you said, these guys are on the front line. We know that many of them are in recent years. I know some of the big boys were in all kinds of trouble with transgender and all these different things because of how you say it. But again, you know, I'm glad that you're bringing this information to us because we are familiar with The one, that famous one with transgender stuff and all the
Right.
different
I
things.
see. It's interesting you should mention the transgender thing. See, one comedian. I mean, I have his case in this book too. Dave Chappelle. Chappelle has
Yeah,
become sort of notorious for his, I guess, let's say his war against transgender, folks.
yeah,
He constantly talks about transgender people, and he admits openly that he enjoys punching down, and then he
yeah,
punches down a lot. This time as transgender people, and then so many attempts have been made to cancel him. There's been lots of uproar over how he treats those subjects. It's like these are taboo subjects. You don't go after transgender people or any of these other so-called vulnerable groups in
yeah,
society. And the vulnerability is defined by what they call historical injustices and discrimination. So if there's any group
yeah,
that has historically been discriminated against, then under current understanding of propriety and decency, i.e., political correctness, uh, then you are not supposed to like attack those groups any further. It's like you must show sensitivity and concern for the welfare of those people. So you are not. They are like sacred cows. You are not supposed to go after them. Well, comedians,
yeah,
if you go after them, then you are regarded as punching down.
yeah,
People would rather you punch up. In other words, you attack powerful and rich people like Donald Trump and the billionaires and other biggies than punching down on vulnerable people, maybe disabled people, maybe old people, maybe rape
yeah,
victims or transgender people. So these are like vulnerable subjects. If you attack them, you are considered to be punching down. People would rather you punch up
yeah,
at the big guys and the rich men. So Chappelle says, no, no, look, I enjoy punching down. This is what I do, and well, this is just what I do. Just you know, live with it, pretty much. And then he goes after transgender people a lot. So there have been so many attempts to get him off the comedy circuit, and it's not working. I guess he's
yeah,
powerful enough to like be able to resist those efforts. And other comedians too, have said things that people generally consider to be outrageous, but you know, uh, most comedians get cancelled if they breach those boundaries. But a few of them have been able to resist that kind of thing so far. So yeah, so that's where we are today. If you're a comedian and if you're not Dave Chappelle or some of the very few people who can get away with some things, then
yeah,
you want to be able to watch what you say because even though the law protects you, the law allows you to say so many things. The First Amendment says you can that you can say offensive things. Under the First Amendment, you can even be racist. You can even be anti-Semitic if under the First
yeah,
Amendment. Those things are not. You wouldn't be breaking the law by being a racist or by being an anti-Semite or
yeah,
by being a homophobe or a transphobe. But so they wouldn't. Uh, the First Amendment allows you to do all of that. But then there is this court of public opinion out there where you have people who will cancel you, cancel culture people, the woke mob, so to speak.
yeah,
So these are two competing courts: the court of law and then the court of public opinion. So the court of law allows you to swing your arms as widely as you can. Of course, there are a few limitations, which is placed very high up on the ceiling. So there's a very long way to travel before you can actually break the law under the First Amendment. So you have a lot of
yeah,
room, wiggle room. But when you get into the court of public opinion, yeah, you don't have much room at all. I mean, very
yeah,
few things that you could do. I mean, there are so many things you can do that can get you in trouble that you wouldn't expect. Should be a problem. So that's where that is. Now, the chapter on the free speech that I talk about, I go through like stories, cases involving Jerry Seinfeld, John Oliver, Jim Norton, Conan O'Brien, Jay Leno, Dave Chappelle. Yeah, so all these folks, I have them covered in this book when it comes to like such a Baron Cohen, what things they did when it came to like free speech. And Jimmy Kimmel, yeah, I have them here where how far can you go and still be okay? But even when you're talking about free speech, I mean, some comedians have asked me, well, um, usually they get sued for defamation, because defamation is like making a false statement of fact that damages somebody's reputation in the so defamation. So defamation lawsuits are very common against comedians. Sometimes comedians who have shows, comedy shows like last week tonight, John Oliver, they've been sued for defamation, by people. So yeah, so that's the frequent thing they get sued for. Now, some have asked me, well, is there a situation where a comedian could actually get in trouble? If we know the First Amendment, gives them a lot of protection, in the courtroom, you can exactly, it's not easy to find them to be liable, but are there any situations at all? Because, people were like, well, does it mean they can just say whatever they want? I said, well, no, it doesn't mean they can just say whatever they want. But if they make what they call a statement of fact that is false, deliberately false, they could get in trouble. At that point, it's no longer a joke or an opinion. No, now it's a statement of fact. Like I gave them a case here in the book, a comedian from Australia. This case came from Australia. A comedian called Nick Malloy. So he went on the show, what they call before the game, like a nighttime show, primetime show, where they talk about humorous subjects, football and things like that. Well, they call it football over there. In America, we call it soccer. But, so they were talking about football. So he goes on this show and he says something about like how some woman who was a politician, Nick Cons, that's her name, an MP, member of parliament, a national politician with high profile. So this comedian was saying that she had had an affair with some player on the football team of her husband, who was a football coach. Well, it turns out it's not true. It was a lie.
Yeah.
Now, she sues him, for defamation and things. Then he tries to say, oh, well, look, I'm a comedian. I was just making a joke. And the court said, no, this is not a joke. You made a statement of fact that happened to be false. And that is the classic definition of defamation. So he was liable for that. But so these are some of the situations where a comedian could actually be liable for defamation, even though generally, they would not. Generally, the court will say, well, they are just making a joke. Come on, you should get a sense of humor. Or maybe, just an opinion. But in this case, I told the comedians, you have to be careful the way you make a joke. A joke is one thing, but if you make a statement of fact that happens to be false, that damages somebody's reputation, then at that point, it's no longer a joke. You're not in defamation territory. But those are the few cases, and there are very few, where a comedian could actually get in trouble in the courtroom when it comes to defamation. But the thing is, people may not win the case, but they'll keep filing the suits. Because when they get offended, they file the suit.
Yeah.
And if you're a comedian, you have to defend the suit. So even though you probably will win, but if you don't defend the suit, then they'll get a judgment against you, a default judgment. So you have to defend the suit. And defending lawsuits, it ends cheap. It ends cheap. You got to get lawyers to defend lawsuits. So it becomes a problem. So the question is, what should you do to at least avoid breaking the law so that even if you get sued, you end up winning? Because, you're going to get sued. I mean, it's a litigious society. I mean, sometimes people sue you, not even expecting to win, but to teach you a lesson, to make you, spend money. Or, as you said, messing with the wrong marine, so to speak. So, these are things that happen. And so I have told comedians, defamation, and it's not just for comedians, for all the rest of us too. Defamation is a serious problem. If you defame somebody, you make a false statement of fact, speak carelessly, you could get in trouble with that. I mean, this case is different from like the case involving Jerry Seinfeld that I have in this book. Yeah. Jerry Seinfeld goes on the David Letterman show. Then he talks about some woman who had sued his wife for plagiarism over some children's cookbook. So the backdrop is that woman sued Jerry Seinfeld's wife for plagiarism over a cookbook for children. And Jerry Seinfeld's wife, she wins the lawsuit. All right, so she won that lawsuit. Then Jerry Seinfeld then goes on the David Letterman show and then brings up this subject about his wife getting sued by this other person, and then he proceeds to call this woman, oh, that she was just an angry person, that she was wacko, she was crazy, she has three names, that people with three names usually are assassins, that's a real problem. That then he mentions Mark David Chapman, James R. Ray, as examples of people with three names who are assassins and things.
Yeah.
Anyways, this woman got really angry, and then she sues him for defamation. Well, long story short, Jerry Seinfeld wins because in America, it's very difficult to be a comedian when it comes to that kind of thing, especially because of the First Amendment. So, the court said, well, no, it was just his opinion. By the way, this is just a comedian talking on a humorous show. It was a comedy show, and he was just talking about, something. Everybody listening to that show, watching that show, understood him to be making a joke. That they didn't really think that this woman was an assassin, that it was just an opinion being made for a joke. And this is different from the case I just told you about the Australian situation, where
Yeah.
somebody actually said that somebody had an affair, which was a statement of fact. It either
Yeah.
happened or it didn't. It's different from your opinion that somebody with three names, will be an assassin. That's an opinion. So there's opinion and then there's fact. So if it's fact, like the Australia case, then you get in trouble, even though it's a show where people make humorous remarks and things. It doesn't matter. Once you make a statement of fact that is false, that's the problem. So Jerry Seinfeld's case was different. Opinion. So I tell comedians, yeah, confine these things to opinion. Make it look like you're expressing an opinion, making
Yeah.
a joke, and people understand it that way. And frankly, in fairness to how the court reached that decision, it was a good decision because nobody watching that show would actually think that this woman was an assassin or that it's just just a comedian talking on a comedy show to comedy audiences that we are laughing at the joke. So that's
Yeah.
different from making a statement of fact. So
Let
that's
me
where I
ask you
draw
something.
the line.
Yeah, let me ask you something, Carl. Does is it common? Is it a common thing for a law for a comedian, or do you guys have like a system with your comedians that you will be able to sit down with them and they have a book of jokes, if you will, their routines? Is it a common thing within that field for this comedian to sit down with a lawyer and say, have him take a look at it before he does the joke? How does that, is that a common thing amongst you guys, amongst that, in that industry?
It's a good question. It's a great question because it comes up a lot. But the thing is, that's like something that will tell you the difference between comedians as entertainers and movie stars,
Yeah.
actors and musicians, actors as entertainers. Now, or maybe people on a sketch show. Now, if it's comedians walk alone, stand up, they walk alone, for instance. They do open mics and other kinds of situations where they craft their jokes and polish them up and test them. So a lot of times they walk alone and they tend to go wherever the jokes are. Like I said, by aspiration and by I guess reputation, they like to be edgy. To be edgy is to to have street cred. To be edgy is to develop a good street cred as a
Yeah.
comedian. Now, and if you're being edgy, you don't have too much time to be watching the lines or trying to be polite to people, maybe vulnerable people. No, they don't do. See, that's why they frequently get in trouble. But that's comedians. They don't have the luxury to have lawyers looking over their jokes and try
Yeah.
to tell them which would offend people or which would not. That which would break the law, which would not. No. Now, consider actors. When actors work, it takes a while for their product to come to market. Somebody's making a movie. It takes months. It
Hmm.
takes a production team. It takes lots of stuff. Then, of course, they have lawyers there working with them to make sure that
Yeah.
they do troubleshooting. They watch. things like defamation. They watch out for things like defamation or invasion of privacy or breach of right of publicity, those kind of copyright infringement. So yeah, so actors are different in that way. So they have the luxury to have lawyers look over their product, to clean them up and get them, keep them out of trouble. But comedians don't have that luxury. Comedians walk alone and they just go where the jokes are. So
Yeah.
that's the thing. It's not. So the question is, can it happen? Yeah, it can happen, but um, don't hold your breath. It's just very uncommon. You're not going to say a comedian go to a lawyer with his book of jokes to say, well, look, how can you? Which of these jokes would make me liable for defamation or whatever? No, comedians don't work that way, but actors work that way.
Yeah.
Except if the comedian is working on a sketch show, a sketch, Saturday Night Live, those kinds of things. Maybe a sketch show or maybe a sitcom, where again they have some time before the product goes to market. Yeah, so in that kind of group setting, but these are situations involving comedians working in groups.
Yeah.
Even though they are working in groups, they are sort of like actors. You know, they are playing a role that will be presented to the public. So yeah, in those situations where there are groups involved, yeah, where it takes a bit of time before something goes from production to market. Yeah, so yeah, there are lawyers who could actually say, yeah, get this part out or change this or change that. But in terms of like the stand-up comic who works nightclubs or comedy clubs and those kinds of things, no, it doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't tend to happen.
The reason why I ask is because of a couple of things you said earlier. The changing society, as you state, where it's more
Yeah,
sensitive, and then you have these guys on the front line, and with their craft.
right.
And you had mentioned also that some people will sue them just to, to,
For the hell of it,
yeah, just for the heck of it. Yeah, a young guy coming up, you know, that can change his life. A young individual coming up, and just for the heck of it, someone is in the audience because of something he said. Because, like, we look in America right now, you have your red states, blue states kind of thing. If you have your routine in a blue state that will laugh and roll on the floor, and you walk over to a red state and you have your routine, as I said, and
right.
the red state mentality is different from quote unquote the blue state
Obviously,
mentality. That artist can be penalized just with the same routine. That's why I was saying this is really you guys are in a, as you said, on the front line as to what we can get away with. The rest of us, what we can get away with and not. And so that's why I posed that question, because that's a tightrope that one must walk.
it's a very valid question. Very valid. Very valid. And I wish I could say there are some good answers to that, but I'm afraid there is no real um, answer to that. That's like it's something that has to do with the society itself. What can the society put up with, and what would it not? I mean, there is no things like the society today is so polarized between the left, the blue states, and the red states. Now, what can we do about it as individuals? Tough, not much. You just have to like respond
Yeah.
to this situation. Have a way, try to keep yourself safe and survive and do your thing. So you just have to navigate this landscape. But the landscape was already determined before you even stepped on the scape itself. So that's the
Yeah.
problem. Now, with respect to comedians, yeah, blue state sense of humor, tends to be different from red state, sense of humor. Now, how a comedian tries to avoid offending the sensibilities wherever at a particular place that he's performing at, it becomes a judgment call for the comedian.
Yeah.
For instance, I mean, if you're like, say, Dave Chappelle, I give you an example of Dave Chappelle. He does these things knowing the consequences. For some reason, he believes he can get away with these things. And so far, he has. Now, but if you're not Dave Chappelle and you don't have that kind of gravitas, in the industry, and you do the same thing, yeah, you could get canceled. You may not get booked again. So, it becomes like a judgment call depending on so many different factors, including the person's gravitas, the person's, the people supporting you who are on your team, sometimes even dumb luck, you know. So, it's a whole different game altogether. And this is sort of like different from what would happen if you were to go into a courtroom being
Yeah.
sued. Somebody sues you in a courtroom. Yeah, it's so much easier. It's so much easier to prevail in a courtroom than in the court of public opinion, where people could cancel you or decide not to see your show. Because look, the bottom line is no court of law. The law cannot force people to go and see a show. If they don't want to see your show because they think you're punching down, that's the judgment of the court of public opinion. Then you're out of luck. Even though in a court of law, you'll be okay with what you're saying under the First Amendment.
Yeah.
So there are these two courts, and that's the problem. How do we navigate the space between these two courts? There's this court here, and then there's that court there. Even look in America, I have to say something for America though, because this issue exists in America, but in other places, there is almost no difference between those two courts. What you have is just one court. The court of public opinion kind of comes into the real court of law. Like in
Yeah.
Canada, for instance, just up north in Canada, where they don't have the First Amendment. So if you make a joke about some things, like I have a comedian I covered in this book, his name is Mike Ward. So he made a joke about a disabled kid from Montreal who had what they call, I think, Treacher-Collins syndrome, which kind of deformed his face and made him look kind of funny. Disfigured his face and his eye. So he looked kind of funny. Now, because of that condition he had, so this kid, he was made into some kind of celebrity as a singer because he was dabbling into singing. So, he performed with Celine Dion, he performed before the Pope. So his profile was rising. Now there was this comedian, Mike Ward. Then this guy said, well, look, when this kid came on the scene with his disability and was singing, I thought that people were being nice to him because he was going to die soon. Now, some years have gone by. He hasn't died yet. He is still alive, still singing. Well, I'm beginning to think that this thing is a scam the whole time. That he was pretending to, be disabled as a way to like promote his singing career. That he said he wishes this kid would die already. Like it's sort of like some real, cruel kind of commentary he made.
Yeah.
So this kid's family, they took him before the Human Rights Commission in Canada, in Montreal, and they fined this guy heavily. They imposed a heavy fine on him for attacking the dignity of this kid and the self-confidence of this kid. That's the law over there. In America, for instance, you cannot get in trouble for attacking somebody's dignity because under the First Amendment, you can do all of that very easily. You can even be racist. You can even be anti-Semitic in America, and you're free. You can't do those things in Canada, for instance, or in Germany, for instance. If you go to Germany, you can go to jail for attacking a foreign leader, insulting a foreign leader. Like one guy I have in this book, because in this book I have cases from Germany, from Britain, from Canada, from Australia. So I have this case about this German comedian who insulted the leader of Turkey, Erdogan, Recep Erdogan. He said that Erdogan watched child pornography and had sex with dogs, that kind of thing. And then the Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they attacked his comedy. Then they were telling the German government that this was beyond the pale. This is not comedy. This was such an insult to Islam and everything that he should be punished. And then the government they investigated this guy for a while to see if what he did was worth getting prosecuted for. And he was this close to getting prosecuted because in Germany, there are laws against insulting a foreign leader, if you can believe that. So, I say these things to dramatize to you that in America, we have this court of public opinion and court of law. Those two things exist because of the First Amendment. In other places where you don't have the First Amendment, Usually you just have one court of law that is heavily influenced by a court of public opinion. So comedy becomes a bit more risky over there than here.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the big things I say in this book is that America is the freest place. The freest place, the safest place you can be a comedian and survive. So, and what makes the difference is the First Amendment that we have here. So, it's
that is, Carl, that is, thank you. I mean, thank you for sharing it, because like I said, it opened up a totally different, it opened up your industry to me, because I didn't know that aspect of it. And guys, everyone that's been listening to our conversation, get the book, man. That's just to get some information, some knowledge as to what those guys that we go and in an arena and pay some money for, and what they go through as comedians, and some of the things, the pitfalls that they have to be aware of, and some of the things, the languages that they say and not say, and those that didn't say it right, or what was that outcome. Carl had compiled all of this stuff, so you and I have access to it. We're going to provide his link and everything also to the book, so that you guys can, and if you have friends that are contemplating becoming a comedian, family members, buy that book and give them a baseline as to what they need to be thinking about when they're standing up there talking, especially if you're going to different countries and different areas and stuff like that. You have to have some kind of a baseline to protect you, and Carl has put that together for you guys. Man, Carl, I want to thank you for coming to Threads of Enlightenment. This has been a really good conversation for me to get some insight as to that world, which I never was a part of or never had any access to. And I thank you so much for coming, man.
I really appreciate you having me. Thank you so much. And it has been my honor to be here and to tell these stories. And one thing I have to leave with your audience. One thing, if they only read the book just for the stories in it, that's a real good thing. There are lots of fascinating stories, titillating stories, about comedians and their shenanigans and adventures and misadventures that I have in this book. Provide a lot of entertainment, which was part of the reason I wrote the book. And one comedy veteran once said that stand-up comedy is the most fun you can have with your clothes on. And, it is true. This book provides a lot of stories that entertain people, that could make you feel like you're watching a comedy show or a comedy, special on Comedy Central. So if you want to read the book for the stories, that's well worth your time. The stories are like dynamite, very fascinating. Then, of course, if you want to read the book for all the talk about the First Amendment, the relationship between comedians and the rest of us, and all that stuff covered in the book, that's fine too. But again, if you want to read the book just for the stories alone, it will be well worth your time. The stories are total dynamite.
Yeah, and for you guys that are listening, I know Carl is talking about the importance of the First Amendment and the protection that goes with that. And I know there's election coming up, and you guys, there's that stuff there about our First Amendment also being, on that ballot. So you guys vote wisely, man. So again, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Man.